Hey everyone, I hope everybody's doing good. I wanted to jump on real quick and just give you an introduction of what this lesson is going to be about. I will be posting up the lessons. I'm not going to go live on Google Meets or Google Classroom or anything. I will be posting the lessons ahead of time or as much ahead of time as possible. So this particular lesson is going to be for my world history class. It's chapter 7, section 1, which is the beginning of the French Revolution. So I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in a little bit. So today we're going to be talking about the French Revolution and Napoleon, which is chapter 7, section 1. The French Revolution begins. The main idea behind this section is that economic and social inequalities in the old regime helped cause the French Revolution. Why does it matter now? Throughout history, economic and social inequalities have at times led people to revolt against their governments. And that's basically what we've seen in American Revolution and now what we are seeing in the French Revolution. In the 1700s, the social and political system of France, or the old regime, remained in place. Under this system, the people of France were divided into three large social classes, or estates. Two of the three estates had privileges not given to the third, including access to higher offices and exemptions from paying taxes. The majority of the clergy and the nobility scorned the Enlightenment ideas as radical notions that threatened their status and power. They didn't particularly care for the idea that the third estate had any more power than they did. The first estate was made of the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church. They owned 10% of the land in France, and they provided education and relief services to the poor, contributing 2% of their income to the government. The second estate was made up of rich nobles. They accounted for only 2% of the population, even though they owned 20% of the land. They paid almost no taxes. The third estate made up 97% of the people. Even in this estate, there were three groups that differed greatly in their economic conditions. Remember, peasants and the urban poor resented the clergy and nobles because they were privileged, they had special treatment. The heavily taxed and discontented third estate wanted change in their government. The bourgeoisie, or the middle class, included bankers, factory owners, merchants, professionals, and skilled artisans. They were extremely well educated, and they felt that they were very equal to the first and second estate members. They believed strongly in the Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality, and they paid high taxes but lacked the same privileges that the first and second estate members were granted in their positions in society. So, of course, this made for a very grumpy group of Third Estate members. The workers of the French cities were the poorest group. They included tradespeople, apprentices, laborers, and domestic servants. They were paid low wages and frequently were out of work and often went hungry, if not starved, because of their lack of money. Peasants formed the largest group in the Third Estate. More than 80% of France's 26 million people were peasants. They were paying half of their income in dues to nobles. They paid tithes, or 10% of their income, to the church, and they paid taxes to the king's agents, which made them very poor. Other factors that contributed to the revolutionary mood in France were new ideas about the government, serious economic problems, and weak and indecisive rulers. We're going into the idea of enlightenment now and how that impacted the French Revolution. New views about power and authority in the government were spreading among the Third Estate, not only in France, but all around the world. They began questioning long standing notions about the structure of society and demanded equality, liberty, and democracy. The same ideas that they helped the Americans fight against Great Britain for not even 10 years before during the American Revolution. By the 1780s, France's once prosperous economy was in decline. The heavy burden of taxes made it almost impossible to conduct business profitably within France. The cost of living was rising sharply. The price of bread doubled in 1789 because there was a very bad harvest that did not produce as much grain as had in the past, and many people faced starvation. France's government sank into a deep debt due to the extravagant spending of King Louis XVI and his queen Marie Antoinette. King Louis XVI had inherited a lot of debt from all the previous kings, and he was also heavily borrowing in order to help the American colonies fight the Revolutionary War against Great Britain, who was one of France's enemies. This doubled the debt, and in 1786 the banks refused to loan the government any more money to help them pay any bills, which of course worried the king, but not very much, because unfortunately he was not that strong of a leader. King Louis XVI was a very indecisive leader. He didn't pay attention to his advisors and had little patience for the details of governing. Marie Antoinette, his wife, didn't do anything to help the situation. She interfered in the government, she offered Louis poor advice, and she was very unpopular in France because she came from Austria, which was France's longtime enemy. She spent so much money unnecessarily on dresses and jewelry and frivolous things that she became known as Madame Deficit. Louis's solution to the debts was to tax the nobility, which in a way made a lot of sense because they had a lot of money and they weren't getting taxed. The Second Estate didn't really like this, so they forced him to call a meeting of the Estates General to approve the new tax. This was the first Estates General meeting held in 175 years, and it was held on May 5th, 1789, at Versailles. Under the Assembly's medieval rules, each estate's delegates met in a separate hall to vote, and each estate had only one vote. Remember, this gave the first and second estates the advantage over the third estate because they tended to outvote the third estate. The third estate delegates wanted to make changes in the government. They were tired of constantly being put down by the first and second estates, so they wanted each delegate to have a vote, which would put them at an advantage because they had more people than the other two states combined. When the king took the side of the nobles, Emmanuel Joseph Sayes, a clergyman who sided with the Third Estate, suggested they take the name of the National Assembly. He suggested under the National Assembly that the Third Estate pass laws and reforms in the name of the French people. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate agreed to Sayes's idea and voted to establish the National Assembly. This act proclaimed the end of the absolute monarchy and the beginning of representative government. This vote was the first deliberate act of the Revolution. 3 days later, the Third Estate was locked out of their meeting room, which was an attempt to prevent them from gathering. Instead, they found an indoor tennis court, which they locked themselves into, and continued to meet there, promising to stay until they had drawn up a new constitution. This pledge became known as the Tennis Court Oath. In Paris, rumors were going around that caused the people to think they would be under attack, and people began gathering weapons. On July 14th, a mob stormed the Bastille, which was a Paris prison. They ended up seizing control of the prison. The fall of the Bastille became a symbolic act of revolution and is now celebrated similarly to how America celebrates the 4th of July. The rebellion soon spread from Paris to the countryside. A wave of senseless panic, called the Great Fear, rolled through France. Peasants, armed with pitchforks and other farm tools, ended up breaking into noble manor houses and destroying legal documents that bound them to pay feudal dues. Remember, they did not want to pay this money because they were already poor and suffering. They didn't feel like they really should be paying this. In October 1789, Thousands of Parisian women rioted over the rising price of bread. They could not afford bread because the harvest had not been good that year, meaning that there would be a shortage of grain, and that would make the price of the grain go higher than what most people could afford. Brandishing different weapons, the women marched on Versailles. First, they demanded that the National Assembly take action, and then switched their focus on the king and queen. They broke into the palace, killing some guards, and demanded the king and queen return to Paris, which they ended up doing. Hours later, the king, his family, and servants all left Versailles, never again to see the palace. Their exit signaled the change of power and radical reforms that would eventually overtake France. And that was the end of Chapter 7, Section 1. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Let me know. You have my email, Google Classroom. There is work posted for this section, and there will be work posted for this section later on this week as well. I hope everybody is doing well, and I'll see you later.